everybody. It's Tina Lorenz, the founder of the Renegade Boomer and a retirement movement. And I'm so excited today on the Renegade Boomer podcast to have my guest of Seth Pepper. I love your name, Seth. And Seth and I have kind of a funny way of how we even met because we found out we both live in the same town of Tucson, Arizona. And we met through our hairdresser. We're both there at the same time.
Yes.
You have such an amazing background. Seth is an elite performance coach, and he works with people at very high level as far as their performance in both professional sports, in business, in the arts, all of these things. I mean, really, Seth, you have a list a mile long of awards and accolades and all of that, but you are the two-time national champion as a professional athlete, 2 times in the Hall of Fame, 25-time All-American. I mean, come on, over delivery. And athlete of the year at the University of Arizona, and just such a fascinating story. But welcome, Seth. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Oh, it's going to be fun. And if you would just take a minute, you have such a great story. I just love how you even got into, shall we say, the game of training your brain. So would you tell
Mhm.
everybody how you even began that journey for yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think it probably just came out of necessity because I started so late. I used to watch the Olympics when I was really young, and I fell in love with it, but I didn't grow up in a family that was sports related. So I was kind of this, freak, if you will. And when I was 14, that was when you kind of start to think, okay, I got to take control of my life. And so I just like, okay, now it's now or never. And I just started, studying the Olympics because that was my ultimate dream, was to go to the Olympics, and chose a sport that I had never done before out of Process of Elimination. I'm from a small town in Oregon, and so I was looking for a sport that I could actually do. And so I chose swimming. Once I started, watching swimming, then the whole process is really, I call it a mental experiment, right? Because I had nothing to lose, everything to gain. And it was all this idea of how can I do this? Can I see something and then just go after it and make it a reality? And so when I focused on swimming, there was a girl that just won the gold medal. And they asked the question that I was trying to figure out, which is what was going to come next. And they said, if someone else is out there that wants to do what you just did, because she had just won a gold medal, I was like, okay, well, they're speaking to me. This is it. And so they asked, what would she suggest? And she said, well, I went through a YMCA. So I went down to the local Y, tiny little place. And I walked in, and the head coach was there and said, I want to go to the Olympics. Can you help me? And he started laughing because, that's not your ordinary conversation. And then he said, okay, well, do you know how to swim? And I said, no. And he laughed a lot more. I said, no, of course. And he said, okay, well, we're going to put you with the 8-year-olds. And so I was with little tiny kids, and they were beating up on me in the pool. I mean, they were much better than I was. I was just trying to get across the pool. But at the same time, my dad, he wasn't an athlete, but he was always interested in self-development. So I grew up with books like Dale Carnegie books and all kinds of self-improvement books. And so this was just a way of like experimenting with those ideas. And my dad had this book it was on the brain, and it was on memory. And they were talking about the subconscious mind, the power of this. I didn't even know that you could train your mind at all. But they had this study that's really well known now. Back then it was East Germany, and they were basketball players, and they had 3 groups shooting baskets. One group, all they did was physical training for that day. And then the other group, all they did was mental and physical. They were a combination. And then the other group, they didn't even touch a basketball, and they just worked on their mind. And the results came back, and the group that was the lowest was physical only. And then the mixed group was the highest. And then this group that didn't even touch a basketball was just a little bit below the top group. So immediately I was thinking, okay, that's the X factor. That's what's going to get me from A to B in the quickest route. And that's what I started focusing on, was training my mind and my body at the same time as I was learning how to swim. So it's a foundation of this mental experiment, and let's see where this can go. One part of the story was that I went to Sports Illustrated because the subconscious mind is visually based, majority of it. And so I was looking for a picture that would inspire me. There was an Olympic edition of Sports Illustrated, and they had Pablo Morales in there. So I cut this picture out, and it was almost like this picture was made for this moment,
Mm.
because it's a picture of him like celebrating. He's got his fist in the air. And so I cut that picture out, and then I put my picture, I took my picture. Now you see it all the time. People are talking about vision boards and things like that. But back then, this was like space age kind of stuff. And so I put his picture up on my wall, just like little kids do. You know, you put your hero up. So I put him up, but I put a picture of myself, and I made sure that they were touching. So it looked like Pablo was cheering for me. And so I would see that every day, and I'd be having this imaginary conversation where on good days he was saying, good job. And on bad, challenging days, he was saying, come on, you can do this, keep going. And I was trying to make the Olympics normal at the same time. So that's what I try and encourage people to do now is, what do you want to do in the future? And let's take it off the shelf. Let's bring it down and let's put it on the same level as you. So eventually I became a state champion of Oregon. And then I reached out to all the top 20 universities. And I tell those parts of the story just because I coach on your thoughts become your words, become your actions, right? So every step, right from the very beginning, when I went up to the first coach, even though he laughed, I was clear up here and I was speaking my truth. And if you said no, and there's no way, then I would have gone to the next person and spoke the same truth until it resonated with someone. But luckily it resonated with him, and, started the journey with him. And that's what I did at the college level. When I went to the college coaches, I spoke the truth, my truth. And I said, this is what I've done in 4 years. And just imagine what we could do together, and kind of baking them into the solution.
I got to jump in here because I'm just feeling like there's so many stories in this. And so, first of all, you were only 14. And I know that
Yeah.
when you and I chatted as we were getting acquainted before, you said that you did a spreadsheet. You actually did like a spreadsheet of this
Yeah.
process of elimination of, well, let's see what works in this small town in Oregon. And by the way, I used to live in Oregon, so we have that in common as well. And you just, by process of elimination, came to, well, swimming, because this is where I live and this is what's available. There is a swimming pool here, this type of
Yeah.
thing. And so
Yeah.
that's the first thing. And it makes me think about if we can kind of capture some of that. I mean, 14 is still a child, right? And capture some of that childlike belief. I think you were very advanced in even thinking this way. But the fact is, if we go back, if we peel back the layers, I think a lot of us can remember things that happened when we were kids that we had a knowing, we had an awareness that's almost like we came into life with, that kind of gets squashed out of us. And I think that you were fortunate that you had a parent that was into kind of the personal development stuff. So you were kind of having that cultivation at home already, but a lot of us didn't have that at all. And somehow can track back to some little thread, that little flame, that little spark, right? That
Mhm.
keeps carrying us forward. And then the next thing is, here you are with a bunch of 8-year-olds, and I bet you were like twice as tall,
Yeah.
at
At
least.
least.
Yeah. And just really having that belief in yourself and that belief in what you were choosing to achieve that was so strong, you did not let anything stop you. Even though it was like a lot of 14-year-olds say, there is no way, there is no way
Yeah.
I'm going to the
Yeah.
pool with these little kids, right? So I just love that the coach asked if you knew how to swim and you did not. But I'm going to the Olympics. And 4 years later, we're already starting to win races and championships when you're 18, right? That's
Yeah, I mean, what looked like a disadvantage, ironically now with what I do, is a very, very important base foundation that I come from, which is I was in a constant state of failure, right? I didn't see it as failure because it was that, right? This is just the reality, and I'm just learning and I'm growing and developing. And when I start with people now, a lot of times they have a fear of failure. And if you have a fear of failure, then your performance is going to go way, way, way down, because everything you do, you have to win. And life doesn't work like that. It's a process. It's just a process. And so that's what I try to encourage people and be able to say, okay, failure is something we have to lean into rather than avoid. So all those things that are uncomfortable, that's the stuff that I started with. And so a lot of times when I'll start with someone, I'll say, okay, we got to flush all the past, we got to let it go. because we got to start over, because all those trophies that you won as a kid, you're carrying them around on your shoulders, right? And you feel like you got to win every single time. And if you feel like you have to win, you're not going to approach every opportunity with open arms and go into it and learn and grow. And you're just going to be playing it safe. And when you play safe, you're really going to be, ironically, you're going to be failing a lot more often.
The other thing that really comes to mind for me is your identity. Do you feel like you were already seeing yourself as a professional athlete, as that Olympian? Do you feel like you were starting to embrace that as your identity even from the time you were 14 years old?
Yeah, 100%. I have so many stories, but one person that came to me, it was off of Instagram, and I didn't know who he was. His name was not his, username. And so he said, is this real what you do? I said, yeah, yes,
I hope it's
it's
just make
real.
believe. Yeah.
And so I said, yes, and let's just get on a call. So we were on a 45-minute call, and it turns out that he is a basketball player, and it's on a Monday. And I could tell that there was all this sort of self-sabotage, right? When people ask me, especially in interviews, what do you do? A lot of what I do is just help people get out of their own way. Okay.
Yeah.
So here he is, he's a basketball player. He grew up in a really tough environment, bouncing from household to household. And so I felt like he wasn't allowing, and this was my Oprah moment, if you will, where I was like, he wasn't allowing himself to succeed because that would be love. And if he didn't feel lovable, then it would be foreign to him. Felt like he was just self-fulfilling prophecy over and over and over. See, I'm not worthy because this happened. See, I'm not worthy. I'm not
Proving
worthy.
to yourself your limitations. See, I knew all along I couldn't do it. See, I was right. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So all I wanted to do in this short period of time was give him a tool that would get him around that so that we wouldn't go into old patterns. And then let's see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And I gave him this permission to just be something else, like an actor becomes a part, right? So I took him through this process of doing that. And so he's like, great, this is great. I have this practice. It's really important on Thursday. So he goes to the practice on Thursday. I go about my day, my week, and then I get all these messages kind
You're
of
having
flooding
exclamation
in.
points.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And he says, I made it. I made it. And I was like, what is he talking about? I made it. Well, it turned out that it was a tryout for the top NBA team.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And it was a moment where it was just like, okay, I'm definitely doing what I should be doing. And, just shifted this person and helped them to shift themselves so that they could allow, just who they were. It wasn't like he was someone else. He was just allowing all that performance to come through him finally, rather than getting in the way.
So many things with that. So many things about his view of himself because of the stories. One of the things I talk about for renegade boomers, in particular people past 50 that are trying to make these shifts in their life, is that many times the people I work with are very high level, but they're so connected to the previous identity. And in this case, for this young man, it was his home life, his lack of home life, the irregularity of it, and not being able to trust and not feeling that he was worthy or loved because that's what he kept experiencing from the outside world. That was the message he kept getting. And so he had internalized that as his truth, right? As this is my identity. But when you, in 4 days, shifted that, helped him shift from see yourself this way, what if you just tried seeing yourself this way instead? And you gave him a tool, you gave him a pathway, you gave him a portal of how to do that. Things change very quickly. And this is such an amazing thing about how our brains work, in my opinion, because those neural pathways, I call them the old stories, the habits of thought, the way you've always thought it, you can start changing very quickly. And your brain literally adapts. It's moldable. There's plasticity, right? And I literally start creating new highways, new neural pathways of this is how I'm going to think this now. I'm choosing to think it this way. And you literally can make a decision about how you're going to think and literally start changing your life by thinking differently. And so this also gets into the whole kind of woo area of manifesting, right? But in manifesting, and I'm pretty sure we're on the same page with this, it's not let's kick back in the lazy boy, turn on Netflix and start scarfing down Pringles and once in a while I'll think a big thought and some amazing thing's going to happen. It's followed with action. I mean, it's actually connected to making decisions about what you're going to do. So for that young man. Same with, interestingly enough to me, that more mature people, older people, people of a certain vintage, right? That I've seen so many professionals that have adapted or adopted a certain story of who they are. And really, it's not who they truly choose to be or feel called to be, but they're kind of stuck of feeling like this is what the world has been telling them they needed to do in their life or in their profession. And so, one of the things of my mission is helping people through that process to really get connected to who are you? You know, did you ever, and maybe you didn't because your parents were probably a little more progressive about this, but I was one of those that grew up with the lecture series from the father, you know, that was cruel.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of question of, well, who do you think you are? You know, who do you think you are? But
Mm-hmm.
isn't it interesting, Seth? What's your interpretation if we were to change that to, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
In a loving way of, who do you truly think and believe you are? What do you think about that as far as how that young man changed his thinking in 4 days?
I've seen it over and over. I mean, for me, that's the fascinating place that I just come from, is this sort of imaginary delusional, I call it constructive delusion, right? That it just works to your advantage. And so for him, a lot of it was, okay, now we made this shift in what I wanted to make, because there's a reality that comes after that shift. Like, okay, I did this, but now I need to live this, right? And so that quick shift, I made sure, okay, now that really did happen. Okay. This wasn't an imaginary dream thing. This was something that actually you did. And I said, but guess what? You can't think that the NBA is a big deal. If you think it's a big deal, you're only going to be there for a week. Right. And so we started this mantra, because again, your thoughts become your words, become your actions. So this mantra just naturally came out of me at the time. And I said, it's no big deal because you're the real deal. And I said, that's what we're going to say over and over and over, just so you can own this space. And that's what's really important is, you're just helping people to see their potential or allow them. I mean, a lot of times when I start with someone, there's just a lot of protective layers over their dreams. And you're trying to like unearth it and say, for him, the question was, if you couldn't lose, what would that look like? Right. And I said, okay, well, why can't we just go out as if you couldn't lose? Because we're not afraid of failure. When we're not afraid of failure, it changes everything, because we're going to be about learning. And once he did that, that changed his relationship to this uncomfortable feeling. And a lot of times when I'm working with people, it's pressure. How do we handle pressure? Because pressure is something that makes us, and naturally our survival instincts are to avoid it, but that's where the opportunity is. And so I'm always trying to bring people into, I guess I could just say it bluntly, I'm bringing them into this sort of painful experience, which is failure and pressure.
Oh
But you're
boy,
going
sign
to
me up. Yeah.
But I make the point that if you go back through your life, there's Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, and he talks about, follow your bliss, right? And so what is your bliss? And if you go and you look at, when was I at my happiest? When I sat down and I painted, when I, wrote, or I did something, expressive, or I went out there and just, in life, more or less captured the flag. I went for it. What was that? And so once people start to understand their bliss, then I come in and I'll say, okay, well, the flow state, the zone, being in the moment, that's your optimal performance level. Okay. That's where you experience that bliss. But here's the catch. In order to experience the bliss, you have to get uncomfortable. Can you tell me one time in your life when, you didn't feel pressure, or there was no, the opportunity and the pressure come together, right? They're in the same package. And so you're trying to get people to move into that space that's uncomfortable and be able to find their bliss with this acceptance that, okay, I call it surfing the wave. We're going to surf this wave and we're going to get into the flow. It's going to be uncomfortable, but that's where you're happiest.
It does
Your
seem,
joy.
it is counterintuitive, definitely counterintuitive. And I think I'm struck by how many people are afraid. people know me also as a freelance copywriter that's worked at very highest levels with some very well-known folks online and offline. And when I'm teaching people, because I have courses about copywriting as well, but when I'm teaching them, I'm always struck at how many times people say, I am afraid, I'm scared. And it's kind of like, of what? And I was talking to my husband today about when I first started as a freelance copywriter, came at it with kind of like you. I didn't know how to write. You know, you didn't know how to swim. And I decided I was going to be a freelance copywriter, and I'd never written for anybody. I'd never been paid to write anything for anybody. I had not been to college on my own since 17, right? And I was already past 50. So, you know, and you were 14 with a bunch of 8-year-olds, right? So, you know, late bloomer on
Yes.
certain things, right? And
Yeah.
I don't really recall being afraid. I made a decision that kind of lit me up, you know, like the Bliss aspect of I love words and I love dealing with people and all that. So I'm going to do this because I'd never even heard of it till I was past 50. So kind of like you, that process of elimination, it was like, it just sort of came across my radar in an article and I decided that that's what I was going to become. So what do you think about that aspect of, there's so many things here I want to unpack in the time we have, but like your basketball player, I'm thinking part of his old story, that belief he had that was limiting him, also came from protecting himself, right?
Yep.
That he had to have a layer of protection from the way he grew up. So sometimes those old stories are insulation. We're all wrapped up in a thick quilt of self-protection, right? So do you think that that kind of opening that up, peeling back those layers is part of the pain aspect of what you're talking about?
Yes. And, you know, what's interesting about it is, you know, we watch movies because movies are stories that we can relate to and they inspire us, right? So they're archetypes. They're just general figures that we can relate to. And I always go back to the movie Rudy, right? And, you know,
Yeah.
it's about going to Notre Dame, going to play football, even though this is a small person with bad grades. And it's him against the odds. And he just keeps focused on, you know, the end goal. But the character that I always talk about is the father, mainly the older brother. So the people that are closest to us can be the greatest cynics, right? Spitting
Yes.
just
Yeah.
poison, right?
Yes.
And what I try to get people to understand is that it's not about you, right? What they're really doing is they're trying to protect their limiting beliefs, right? And you are a threat to that existence. And so I call them crabs in the bucket, right? So you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, you don't need to put a lid over the top because when one crab starts to almost get out, the rest of them pull them back, right? And so I said, you know, let's go back to the basketball player. I said, now that you made it, don't be surprised if those people that were really cynical in your life come back around and they have amnesia. And now they want a ticket on your, you know, your bandwagon,
Yeah.
right?
Can I sit in the front
And
row at your next game? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because it happened to me. And then he comes back to me and he says, how did you know that? Like, all of a sudden they just like, oh, I knew you could do it. I knew you could do it. And he's like, I'm getting invites to like people's baby showers. Like these people were my biggest haters. And now they want me at their most intimate parties. I said, see, it wasn't about you. They were threatened by what you represented. And that's what a lot of times when we go through our life, we're surrounded by our parents, our siblings, these close people in our family, and we take on those limiting beliefs and, you know, we don't even know it. We don't even realize it. And so that's what I try to help people to understand and not take that personally and move on and be able to move through your space and allow yourself to dream. Because a lot of times when I'll start with building a foundation of, okay, you know, if you couldn't lose, what does that look like? Let's talk about your dreams. So really what you're doing is you're going back to, you know, being a kid again, where you did cut out pictures and put them on your wall as a kid, because that was your hero, you know, and that hero is the guiding light. And so we're going to go do that. We're going to be a kid again, and we're going to allow ourselves to dream. And then we're going to build it. And so we're not just going to sit there and say, okay, well, now I've cut out the picture and it's up on the wall. No, we're going to go through some discomfort, right? Because even if I gave you that result right now, it would be hollow. Let's say it's $10 million, right? Or a big, huge trophy that everyone wants. If I just give you the money, if I just give you the trophy and you don't get the journey, you're going to feel so empty, and you're going to need another trophy and another trophy, right? You're going to need more and more millions of dollars, or whatever that end result is. It's a great guiding light, and it inspires us. But ultimately, and I've helped people to win a lot, a lot.
Yeah.
And my first question is always, now what does it feel like? You did it. You
Mhm.
did it. First time in your professional career, you did it. Now what? Let's say, I want to go do it again. So yeah, it's not fulfilling. It was a great guiding light. It created this timeline for us to work on these important life skills. And along the way, that journey, that was the reward, wasn't it? Yes.
So
What was that journey?
that's what it brings to mind when you were saying that the NBA is not a big deal, when
Yeah.
you're coaching him. So the question I have for you about that is how you find that balance between releasing the outcome, but yet having the drive and the goal to achieve the outcome. Like, you wanted to go to the Olympics, or you want to be the champion. He wanted, and you didn't even know
Yeah.
he was having a tryout on that Thursday. So if the NBA is not a big deal, then how do you balance that?
Yeah. Great question. I think it's a combination. So we work on goals that are short term, mid-term, and long term. We give ourselves permission to dream, but we also want to make sure that those goals, we try and find a sweet spot. If it's too far and it's fanciful, you're not going to take it serious. And so, especially in the short term goals, we got to get to some things that, yes, they're a stretch. They have to be out of your comfort zone. You have to reach, I like to say, you need tension to grab your attention. So I'm always looking for people shifting around in their chair, because then I know we're getting to the sweet spot. Now we're like, this isn't just dreamland,
You
this
get
is
kind of
like,
worked up,
yeah, now I can, I could see kind of getting, and then also we want to make sure the goals aren't too low where it's just a to-do list, right? And, again, we're playing it safe. That's not going to bring us the results that we want. So you're mapping things out. And then at the same time, I really go back to, okay, so now you've achieved that goal. You have that money, you have that trophy, or whatever that is. What comes with that? What's the feeling that you get from achieving that? And around 9 times out of 10, it'll be some version of, I'll feel confident. Okay. So let's just go with the emotion of confidence. What if you just felt confident now? Okay. Well, that would increase your odds of getting to that end goal. Yes. Okay. So we're going to work on confidence. What's interesting about confidence is that confidence is a byproduct, right? If we just focus on confidence, I got to be confident. You're going to be like a dog chasing your tail, right? So we go back to, how is confidence built? So we're looking at little tiny things. The irony is always like, it's a big, huge, shiny result, but it comes back to the immediate little tiny thing that's right in front of you, right? What am I going to do today? What am I going to do this moment? Okay. So we're going to focus on little tiny things that you can actually control, which are your breathing, right? Which are, even your posture, just really super simple things, how you talk to yourself, because you're your greatest expert. So these are really simple things. I always like to say the power is hidden in the obvious. Right? It's just like you go to a nutritionist, and what are they going to most likely say?
Eat more
Well, you got to
vegetables.
hydrate, you got to drink some water,
Yeah.
right? The free stuff, is the most powerful thing that we got to start with. So I'm kind of doing that with the mind. And so I'm taking people through just understanding, how do we, if you think of the momentum that you're going to get from doing these little things, then you're going to build up momentum like a train, and that train just gets going faster and faster and faster. And just like real trains, even if there's a semi on the track, those trains can go right through them. And the track is the projection out to the goal. And so you're building the small and you're building the big, and you're connecting the dots. So you do need the dreams,
Mm.
and you also need the immediate, like, what are we going to do now? And then they get closer. And what's interesting is they get into the process of learning, and they really feel the journey, the reward. You hear people focus on the process. So that's the process. And they get so into it, and then they don't even realize that they just achieved their goal. And I'm the one that comes back, because my relationship with them is A to B. You just tell me what you want to do, and that's it. You don't have to qualify anything with me. Now, I have a story that I shared with you where I work with a university professor. And so when we started, she's older, and she said, I want to retire soon. She's a chemistry professor. And she said, I know that I can teach little children college level chemistry, and that's what I want to do. Okay, great. Well, what's the goal? Like, what's the gold medal for you? And she said, I want the Emmy. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, that's perfect because that's a shiny object that we
Yeah.
can visually put on our phone and really
Yeah.
start to program the subconscious mind. And so from that point, we started building it out and working through things. And she started with a comic book. She hired one of the illustrators that created the Lilo and Stitch characters
Oh,
from Disney.
yeah.
So she's starting at the top level with putting together her team. And from there, I taught her, again, it's your thoughts become your words, become your actions. So I showed her how to do that in social media, some networking tools, because it's the same thing. Social media is not some big scary thing. It goes back to, are you willing to talk to people, right? Are you really willing to put your truth out there?
Mhm.
And so just like me reaching, going to the coach when I was 14 or reaching out to the college coaches, social media is the same thing to me. It's the same sort of version of like, speak your mission statement out to the world, right?
Yeah.
And speak from their needs. And so we did the networking. We went through all this, some networking. She built a presence online, and she built such a strong presence that the Academy of Television and Arts, they came to her and they said, would you like to be a judge for the Emmys?
So crazy.
And last week, she was on the red carpet at the Emmys, being around all these people. And so here she is. That's her putting, something up on her wall. And I always say, focus on the why, not the how. The how is something that you only get one step. You got to just focus on the why, which is that end dream.
Mhm.
And then we're going to just act on the how. Those are the little tiny steps that build the momentum, and just keep showing up. And so it was interesting because I didn't even see, I'll say, I don't know how this is going to end. I don't know where that story's going to go. We're just going to get closer.
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
I
and
love
so when she came to me and said, yeah, the Emmys, I'm going to judge the Emmys. And now I'm going to the Emmys. And then she was the one that's like, hey, Seth, I just reviewed all these projects and they're not as good as mine.
Wow.
I'm just as good as at least as good as theirs. And immediately I was like, right here, the shift's happening. Just like that NBA player.
Yeah.
Oh, I can play at this level. Oh, and then she's the one that I use the same mantra with her. And she says, it's no big deal because I'm the real deal. And she's building that future. And all we did was, just to keep it really simple, we were like little kids. What do you really want to do? Go get a picture of that. Allow yourself to dream, and then let's build it out.
Well, the other thing I love about that story is someone that said, I want to retire from this thing, which is
Yeah.
exactly what we do with the Renegade Boomer. It's really about, someone accomplished, someone that already top of her game in another arena that sees this other pathway that's actually more playful, maybe allowing her really true nature to come out even more fully because she doesn't have to worry about tenure and, pleasing the administration of a university or anything like that. And look what's happening is that literally the red carpet is rolling out before her. And that's what I see for so many now because our life expectancy is longer. The old Social Security system was built that our life expectancy was early 60s. Now many people are reaching 100, but at least having 20, 30 more years of productivity, what are you going to do? I mean, if you want to sit with your toes in the sand and enjoy the frosty drink, that's awesome. But what if you could blend it along with this other deeper desire or dream that you have and play with it, right?
Yeah.
Whether you want to make money with it, whether you want to do social good, it doesn't really matter. Maybe you've already made your millions of dollars, or you're very secure financially, but you know that you're not just about to go sit in a corner somewhere, right? And this gets into so many things like ageism and other people's expectations, which brings me back to what you were saying about those near and dear to you, that whole balancing act, because sometimes some of us have had to literally close the door on some of those folks
Mm.
because of toxicity, because of the story that was always told to us about ourselves or way we were seen in that particular community, or it
Yeah.
can just be that feeling of that they feel threatened. I think the other aspect of that is, well, if you change, what does that mean for me, right?
Yep.
If you're
Yep.
changing like this, I'm threatened by it, you know? And so sometimes that's also stumbling blocks for people to go through these transitions. Have you found that to be true, that sometimes people have fear and discomfort and pain around that aspect because they think they will lose other key relationships or other connections by moving forward? They're moving beyond what some of their near and dears are doing.
Yeah. It's a great question. And, I'm a person that's very practical. And so I will say to them, greatness can be a lonely road, because you're doing something that not a lot of people can relate to. And so the professor is experiencing that people in the academic world don't understand, and she experienced some of that pushback, like, who do you think you are? That's what
Yeah.
she did. She shared with me, she goes, oh, I just got the invite from the Emmys to judge the Emmys, and I shared it with some of my colleagues, and they think it's a scam. They couldn't even get their mind around that
It's
that could
not,
even
yeah,
be
it's not even on the
possible.
radar, right? It's like that can't possibly be real. You, who do you think you are, right?
Yeah.
I
So
think
can
I'm a
you
person who's going to
imagine
win
if
an
she was
Emmy.
trusting the academic world and
Yeah.
just thinking, okay, well, they must know, I'm just going to discard this. It's just a scam, right?
Yeah.
She would have missed out on going to judging the Emmys, seeing her, as an Emmy winner. As she was leaving, cool little story she shared with me. I met with her last week, and she shared this story. She said, as I was leaving, there was a woman that had won the Emmy, and she was putting it into her bag, right? And I was seeing all these real things, like, oh, that's what you do with an Emmy. You get it, and you have to
And
take
just
it,
put it in
right?
your bag. Yeah.
And so she said, she talked to the woman and she said, oh, congratulations. I loved your speech and it was so wonderful. And she said, I'm working on my Emmy, and the woman was putting her Emmy in her bag and she turned to her and says, you'll do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I get emotional about that stuff because
Yeah.
it's happening. It's
Yeah.
a real thing that's happening. And it's just, again, it's no big deal because you're the real deal. Like, that's a woman that just won the ultimate prize. And she's saying, you can do it.
Yeah.
Just go do it.
It looks just like this, that image. I just love, and I understand that emotional feeling that you can get, because when we work with people at this level and we see that transcendence, that transformation, it become a reality for them. That's because we work from the heart ourselves, right? That
Oh,
connection that we truly, truly are celebrating with them and feeling that joy. And I call it my chilometer. I'm getting it right now, like chills all over just thinking about it, There it goes.
oh,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
and
it's incredible. I
and
mean,
then
to me, because my answers have to come from inside, right? So I think what I bring to the table is that I've been out to what I call the performance battlefield, right? And so I did get my degree in psychology, but for me, the real life experience of actually being out there with feeling like your life's at risk, because that's the intensity of putting that much into. I mean, I was training 4 years in between Olympic trials for a race that was 20 seconds long. I was
wow.
putting it all on the line for 20 seconds long. And so that level of commitment, that level of sacrifice, and that level of pressure, right? Being able to speak from that truth, that's what I go to. I put myself in their position and then I'll go, okay, this is what I feel right now. And so we're creating something organic between the two of us in the moment. And I'm a participant, but I'm also in the flow state. So I'm also an observer of what's going on at the same time. And I'm interested in what's going to happen because I'm saying maybe the same sort of overall content to them that I said to others, but it's coming out completely unique with them. And
Yes.
I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm allowing that to be something that they're drawing it out of the experience. And also for me, if we go back to the flow state and being in the zone, being in the flow and that discomfort, right? Like, that's when you're at your best, is when you're surfing a big wave. Those big wave surfers, they get into the flow state just about every time. And so those are the people that I look to for inspiration. And so the three main elements of that is, I call it the tripod, is you have to have a sense of control. So you have to be able to surf the wave. You're not just going to get in over your head, because then you're going to be overwhelmed. So you do need some sort of ability. Can you handle the task that's asked?
Yeah.
And then the other leg is unpredictable. So every wave is brand new in their world. So it has to be unpredictable. And then the third leg, which is where we spend a lot of time on, is pressure. So there's a pressure, because if they crash, they could literally die. And so we're going to feel the same sensations by caring about our goals. That's what's going to create that pressure. You got to drop into a big wave, and it's all relative. So everyone has a big wave in them, but you got to drop in. And when you're dropping in, I don't care who you are, it's going to be uncomfortable. And once you connect the dots with people, like, that's where you experienced your bliss, right? So, I was helping with someone that, works with a big corporation, and they were shifting the corporations around, like the offices around, and they gave him some warning, and they said, you can go and talk to everyone, if you want to. And this is the big, I'll just say the name, the big IBM, right?
Yeah.
And so I took him through the networking. And, he's wants to reinvent himself. So he's nervous about that, but that's a good thing. And he's older as well. And he looked at it and he said, okay, so you're saying I got to get into the flow? Yes, you got to surf that wave. And so for him, it was reaching out to a different department, something that he'd been curious about. And so he said, my heart was beating out of my chest when I was about to send that message, just to make that introduction.
Yeah.
And so I said, but that's the wave. That's the wave. We're getting in the wave. And so he said, it was like almost magical, because within 1 week, I had 4 meetings, things I never would have done in the past. I had 4 meetings, and these meetings were high level. They were so much higher than I'd experienced before. And there was one that said, well, I don't think you're qualified, because this is really specific, and we train these people for, he said, but I'd be willing to talk to you. So he goes into this high level, conversation, and the guy goes, well, it's not going to work in my division, but I really like you, so I want to help you. So I'll introduce you to some other people. And he was like, wow. And I was like, that's the flow. That's being in the zone. That's your bliss. And you got to just keep surfing those waves. And so that's part of what I'm doing. That's what's genuine about me, is that I'm surfing with them, right?
Yeah.
I'm never comfortable. I mean, that's just my process, is that I'm never comfortable.
But
You know?
and then and then understanding that that's okay. So I think you
Yeah.
just said kind of a game plan, because I'm particularly interested. I know you've worked with so many professional athletes, but I've heard you interview our conversation. There's several examples of working with people in business, and so for entrepreneurs, for those that are moving into a new realm of, or that are over 50, because you and I both inhabit that land as well. That's
Mhm.
never comfortable either, not completely, right? And
Yeah.
so, can you kind of sum up, as we're wrapping this up today, maybe 3 tips that you would give? And I think you kind of just did, but kind of revisit that for those that are entrepreneurial, those that are venturing into something new, or going to shift from what they used to do, what that looks like your college professor who literally got pushback from others, kind of like, and it's almost like kind of some jealousy, it sounds like, too, of what does she think she's, what do you mean
Yep.
going to Hollywood, this kind of stuff.
Yep.
Can you kind of give us like 3 tips for entrepreneurs that are making that shift or coming into a new aspect of what they're doing, how they ride that wave?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say I'd probably do a 1, 2, 3 and say, okay, first of all, just start to let yourself, dream, right? I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for everyone, especially if you've been disappointed in the past. You're probably playing it safe. You're probably protecting yourself. Your goals are probably more stretch yourself out there in that uncomfortable space. Just give yourself permission. If I couldn't lose, what would that look like? Right.
Yep.
And then do maybe, that's a long term, do a midterm and a short term.
Okay.
Focus on those little things that you can do that you have control over now, right away. And then I would say, okay, so that's number 1. And then number 2 is going to be that go into it knowing that you're going to fail and lean into the failure. Okay. There's a phrase that I learned from someone that's a dear friend of mine that's one of the NBA mental coaches. And he helped someone to just basically turn their career around. And it was their relationship to failure, which is fail your way to the top. Right. And so Kobe Bryant is someone that I use kind of as an archetype because he was always in the process of learning. And his quote was, failure is an illusion, right? And he'd say, it is. What's failure? Failure is not failure to me. So it's not a fact. It's what you're interpreting. And so my failure is different. And I get to define it whatever way I want. And it's an illusion because it's all made up. Just tell me what it is. Can you tell me what failure is? It doesn't exist. Because the only failure that I would say is failure is if you fail on Monday and you don't get up on Tuesday. That's failure, right? But if you get up again on Tuesday, you're learning. So it's a process of learning.
Excellent.
So that would be number 2. And number 3 is just embrace the pressure and get into that wave. Find a wave that, that scares you a little bit. We don't want it to be too big where you get overwhelmed, but get into that flow and find something and just know that it's going to be uncomfortable. Just know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's something where you're going to find your bliss. And if you go back through your life and you say, when I was just a little bit daring, man, I felt so alive. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent because it's kind of like the way I see the discomfort and then the bliss is like, okay, so you push through that, like your guy with the big company and having that uncomfortable phone call where his heart was beating out of his chest or hitting the send button for his email, whatever that might have been. But then the bliss was, oh my gosh, look what happened next. I got this conversation and this person's going to help me by introducing me to others, like the ultimate networking, right? And so would you consider that to be kind of the discomfort that turns in, that also joins forces with the bliss?
Yes, I would. With the study, if you take that tripod and you apply it to money, okay? A lot of people say, well, if I make a certain amount of money, then I could pay all my bills and all my problems are going to be, we know, people will throw around, well, money doesn't make you happy. But in that study with that tripod, you can show that money doesn't make you happy. So let's say, $100 million. That's a lot of money to a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people. Okay. So all of a sudden you have control over your life. Okay. So I'll give you that. That's the first leg of the tripod. But all of a sudden you live in this big mini mansion or a mansion and, everything's predictable, right? So you've lost the unpredictability, right? And then the third is you have no pressure. There's no pressure. You don't have to do anything, right? So then people will go, well, I have $100 million and I'm miserable, right? I want to give that lottery back because now I see everybody else just wants my money and all these experiences of all the,
Can't
it's all
trust
negative.
anybody, everyone has ulterior motives. It's like the basketball young man who suddenly everybody was like, I knew you could do it, So,
Yep.
and you don't know what's real anymore with those relationships, right? And so
Yep.
I would equate this to the retirement movement that I'm forging ahead with and feel this mission for, not only because I've lived it, because I didn't start till I was past 50, what I'm doing. Don't do the math, right? but because the dream of retirement, of just sitting doing absolutely nothing, can be a formula for early death or complete boredom at the very least. And so keeping your brain active and continuing to pursue those goals and continuing to lean into some of that discomfort and not thinking it's ever going to be like, okay, I've arrived to this place of complete comfort at all times, which ends up actually being like, wow, am I bored? Out of my gourd, right? There's no more challenges left. So this has been so amazing. And I feel like entrepreneurial people that are watching this, wherever you are in this realm, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an artist, Seth has ways that he can work with you as well. And I hope that these steps that we've gone through in some of our conversation today has kind of lit a fire under you, and that not only the aspirational aspect but the motivational aspect, and really the promise of what's possible for you, whether you're in your retirement years and starting something completely new, want to transition from what you used to do, or still chasing that bigger wave, so to speak. So how can people get a hold of you if they'd like to follow up with you and just learn more about what you do?
Well, the simplest is, my full name, sethpepper.com. That's my website. I try to put all the interviews on there. So you can go and listen to some of the podcasts, and you can contact me if you're interested in the coaching and working with one-on-one, and then also with groups, with companies and with teams. And then social media across the board, Seth Pepper,
Seth Pepper ought to find you. I mean, it's a cool name. So the spice of life and all of that. We could have a whole field day with that. But thanks so much
Yeah,
for
yeah.
being here with me today. And I love that we can meet outside of getting our hair styled by the fabulous girl at Wild Orchids in Tucson. Plug.
Yeah.
That's for you, Michelle. So
Yes.
thanks so much for being here today. I really loved our conversation. I look forward to having more conversations with you as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to Seth if you would like to work with his mental magic and get your game going even better than you ever thought you could. So thanks again, Seth, for being here today. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for your time. I really appreciate it.